Ladies and gentlemen, let's Red Gaming to video. Let us hear from Naughty Dog and their opinions of frame rate when it comes to video games. So I'm sure many of you will have heard the various arguments versus the 30 and 60 debate, and obviously it's a bit of a decision the games developers have to make. Now, concerning The Last of Us on the PS4, the game will run at 1080p, but Naughty Dog are saying that there are some aspects of this that they're still not exactly sure of yet. For example, in regards to the cutscenes, what are they going to be doing? Are they going to be doing 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second? Well, they said, and I quote, "That's still in progress, but they were at least being re-rendered at a higher 1080p resolution, plus maybe whatever we can add." This was from Naughty Dog's community strategist on Maya. You also added, "I highly doubt we'd do real-time based on our previous history with cinematics, but I wouldn't hold my breath for that. Frankly, the visual fidelity of our PS3 cinematics was pretty fantastic. I'd love to see the game push beyond that, but it's a high bar to start from. As we get closer to release, etc., we can probably shed some more light on this. We've been putting our games at 30 FPS, more or less, for a while now. I mean, if you only want 24 FPS, that would let us put a whole lot more effects in." Now, in case you're wondering what he means by that, 24 FPS is generally speaking the frame rate that movies run at. And in other words, if you're running at a lower frame rate, quite simply put, you can squeeze more effects in because, well, your GPU has longer to render per frame. He then added, "Speaking less sarcastically, 30Hz, 60Hz, and anything in between is more than just about being cinematic. It's also about the underlying systems that affect gameplay and how you refresh. Your body/eye can't compensate for that it does like when watching 24 source material on film. Don't get me wrong, I'm a huge cinephile, and by sorry guys, I was just getting attacked by a moth there. And by Criterions, watch things in original format as possible, etc. But in games, as most of you will know, the higher the frame rate you could pull out, the better the overall experience. Generally speaking, games versus TV don't have the soap opera effect at higher than 24 FPS rates in my experience. But then again, I'm not a dark 10x frame rate peeper. I, for one, am looking forward to seeing our final result with The Last of Us on the PS4. So, out of quote, what are my thoughts on this? Honestly speaking, I mean, I was reading a few comments and stuff, and most people really want 60 FPS for The Last of Us. I mentioned that I actually found the combat a little bit sticky because on the PS3 version, it looks gorgeous, especially for like a previous generation game. No one could debate that, and I'm someone that's really into visuals. There were some issues regarding level of detail. For example, if you're at certain points in the game, primarily if you've got a sniper rifle and you zoom in, you'll notice that sometimes the game engine doesn't actually increase the level of detail despite the fact that you're zooming in. So, for example, let's just assume you're on like a precipice and you're looking down at the town. The game, generally speaking, will have several levels of detail, in other words, various texture resolutions and polygon models, depending on the distance you are away. The general rule of thumb, of course, is that the closer you are, the higher the resolution texture that will be applied, so the detail matches. Now, obviously, the game has to do an algorithm, and based upon your proximity, it will then swap in the relevant texture. What I noticed sometimes, and this is just one example of this, when you're using a sniper rifle or kind of looking at things with it, you shouldn't really do it. It doesn't really do what some games do and swap the detail in. So, for example, as you're zooming in, something like Crisis, if you're using the binoculars, you'll notice there's a slight delay sometimes on the binoculars, particularly on the first game, and that's generally, especially if you're zooming in like to a new area, because the game's basically loading assets pretty much. But for the PlayStation 3's The Last of Us, it doesn't do that. It's very smooth, but you'll notice that sometimes you can kind of see some ugly textures. And that's just one example. I've mentioned combat issues a few times, primarily when there's a lot of particles on screen, that type of thing. And if the frame rate tanks to, the low 20s, it's not exactly conducive, because then you start to get a lot of input latency, which is not exactly ideal conditions for action. Now, regarding the cinema and general cutscenes, I don't really mind so much as long as it's not too jarring. So sometimes if you go from like 60 to 30, I think it can be a bit jarring, but obviously that means in theory they would be able to add a lot more effects into that, because obviously, well, the GPU simply wouldn't have to output so many frames. So I guess it's kind of a toss-up. I guess it's whatever they can do and whatever looks best. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.